What inspired this move, and how do you see this leadership transition kind of connecting you with your past work in infrastructure?
Yeah, great question. So what kind of led me into my second startup was I left Duke's and we started taking sewer data in sewer pipes and we started putting it on pivot tables on Excel spreadsheets. And we would take all this.
Did you know that mental health is becoming one of the most pressing issues in the construction and engineering industries? As the AEC sector evolves, addressing mental health challenges is no longer simply a conversation. It's a priority, and technology is emerging as a crucial tool in this important effort. In today's episode, we discuss how technology can address mental health challenges in the construction and engineering space and the critical need for digital transformation in our sector with guest Chad Smeltzer, President and CEO of Bidcurement and Vice President of Technology at Maize of Life Resource Center. He's also the host of the Infrastructure Hot Seat podcast, where he talks about the latest developments in infrastructure. Join us as we dive into the future of engineering and construction through the lens of leadership, mental health, and technological innovation. I'm your host, Anthony Fasano, and this is the AEC Leadership Show. All right, now I want to welcome our guest onto the show for today. Chad Smeltzer is the president and CEO of both Bidcurement and the Infrastructure Network, also vice president of technology at Maize of Life Resource Center. And Chad, welcome to the AEC Leadership Podcast.
Thanks for joining or having me, Anthony. I've done podcasts too, so I almost did my own introduction there. Sorry about that.
No worries. We're happy to have you, and always happy to have a fellow podcaster. I know it's I haven't had a lot of those on our shows, but I'm happy to have you. And Chad, maybe you can start off by sharing a little bit about yourself and kind of how your career in the engineering and infrastructure space has kind of evolved over time.
Yeah, great question. So I started in sewers, public works when I was a young kid. Didn't have any ambition to go back into wastewater treatment. When I was 15, we were doing a lot of wastewater treatment stuff, and my dad was the supervisor of the plant, so to speak, and we'd work for him and go in and clean sludge tanks. And I was like, I'm never going back into the public works or sewers ever again. And lo and behold, and I was in 26, it was 2008, 2009, something about that. I was getting out of the pest control industry where I was. We were doing grease trap treatments with biological products. And I saw an opportunity to use biological treatment in sewer pipes for fats, oils, and grease and pump stations. And I was like, man, why don't we do this in the sewer systems? We're doing it for grease trap maintenance. Why aren't we doing the sewer system? So I started a company, my first company in the East Coast back in 2009, started to learn a lot about entrepreneurship and how the long sales cycle is for government contracts. And I started to get the real world experience of government contracting real fast. Picked up some contracts, luckily over a period of time with some cities I was working with. So it worked out great. I kept going, but in that space, you need a lot of funding, to keep growing and keep expanding the business. But I didn't know enough back then about entrepreneurship or business, to be honest with you. So I kind of burned a lot of cash and didn't understand how to run a business effectively. So sold that company to a company called Duke's Rookadrol out of Syracuse, New York. They basically brought me on board and said, hey, we're going to put you out in the East Coast or Midwest, I should say, and help us with a sales territory out there with managing routes for treating roots and stuff out of sewers. So that's kind of where I started into this whole space and got me into the sewer industry.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing where our careers can kind of take us sometime. And, entrepreneurship is something that is, I think you just get kind of better and better with it as long as you can, stay with it, and kind of make it last a little bit. So Chad, you've recently taken a leadership role in the mental health space, kind of building technology to support those in need. What inspired this move, and how do you see this leadership transition kind of connecting you with your past work in infrastructure?
Yeah, great question. So what kind of led me into my second startup was I left Duke's and we started taking sewer data in sewer pipes and we started putting it on pivot tables on Excel spreadsheets. And we would take all this data, put it on these spreadsheets, and then we'd take it all back to the utilities department and say, hey, here's where we prioritized all your defects. And here's where we think you should spend your money versus like just throwing darts at a dartboard. We were seeing a lot of that happening in that space of sewers where the firms, nothing against the engineering firms, but they were just kind of guessing where some of the issues would arise. So we were taking capital money and trying to fix pipes that were actually in good shape. So we started taking data, facilitating that data so that we can make better decisions for these utilities. And that's how we started a second startup called RMS Utilities. It was a contracting company. We would find these problems for these utilities, and then we would fix them. We built a team of contractor guys to go out and fix them. So we'd find it and fix it. So that was where this data stuff started for me as an entrepreneur. I'm like, wow, we can take data and we can actually use this and make decisions, make better decisions. Hence your question. We ended up selling that company to Dukes, which I mentioned earlier. So they kind of bought that company from us. And then I realized there was an issue in procurement. So I was like, man, I'm sitting there in my house in 2020 during COVID, and we're still using manila envelopes to hand in bid specs. And I'd travel around dropping off bid specs in front of these village halls. And I'm like, what are we doing this for?
Right.
We have the computers right in front of us. Why aren't we sending electronic documents back and forth and just getting it done that way? Well, as a lot of people probably know, procurement has been very antiquated and fragmented for a long time. And what I decided to do was just start another company with tech kind of in mind. I was like, well, we can build a technology, a platform where we can just exchange these documents and award these contracts on a platform. And there really wasn't anybody doing it at the time. There is now, but that's how this whole thing started with me with procurement. I was thinking, well, why can't we use video or digital twin of a manhole, for example? We were using photogrammetry in these pipes anyway when we were out using robotic cameras. I was like thinking to myself, well, why don't we use that in procurement? Why are we just sending out a blueprint map on these specs and just, black and white maps? I was like, why don't we use video of all that data we're collecting out in these procurement opportunities and just upload them and show the contractors what needs to be fixed or how it, where it's located, right, to be fixed, which would save a ton of time and money. So that was over the last 3 years. I started in 21. I was looking at a way to use video more with kind of these interactions with you and I in podcasts. So I started doing podcasting. I built the infrastructure network at the same time. And it was a great way to connect with you, like guys like myself and you, right? We connect digitally now because 2020 kind of pushed us in that new direction. And then that's where, in long story short, this mental health space started coming out because what I've ended up doing, and my wife was involved with this company called Maize of Life. And she's like, hey, this company needs a technology and they're help facilitating mental health. So they were interviewing people basically because of COVID. They had to go offline too, everything online virtually. So they would interview their clients online and they were doing all this interactions, but they weren't collecting data from that. So that's where this all kind of ties together. They were like, hey, we need a technology. I'm a startup, so I'm still struggling as a startup. Anybody knows what startup life's like. It's a struggle to pay the bills and keep things going. So it was a great merger between what we were doing at procurement with video and what they're doing with video too, and how we could maybe use biometrics now to help facilitate some of those connections.
That's interesting. So basically, just kind of recap all that. So, you got started obviously as a teenager, as a kid, getting just through your father, just getting exposed to public works and sanitary sewers and different things. You did it for a while. You didn't necessarily want to get back in that capacity of it long term in your career, but you got turned on to technology, got excited about that, and then you went down the road of being able to analyze these sewer systems with data, and then ultimately analyze them, point out deficiencies, and then repair them, right? Building that company that you built. And then through kind of the connection that your wife had with this Maize of Life, you thought about maybe we can do the same thing in the mental health space. If they're doing all these kind of sessions and calls and stuff, but they're not really collecting data around it, we can collect that data, which can help to inform the mental health space and I guess make it a better, better to serve clients and patients kind of moving forward. Is that the ultimate goal here with the data?
Yeah. Ironically, this ties in back to civil infrastructure, what we're doing in engineering. I mean, mental health is a huge impact on construction right now for a highest suicide rate out there. If you look at some of the statistics, and engineering too, there's a lot of issues with mental health and substance abuse and stuff like that in our space. As I've observed too in my industry of traveling as a salesperson on the road, all these trade shows we go to, all these connections we do traditionally, where I've seen a lot of guys kind of, become addicted to certain things or do certain things. And it really does impact our life in this world of civil infrastructure and construction. So ironically, Maze of Life will eventually tie into kind of what we're doing to help facilitate a lot of the construction workers that are on the road, sitting in hotel rooms, just nothing to do, no one to talk to. They don't really want to talk about like this with their construction buddies, their personal feelings, because that's kind of looked upon as like,
Right.
weakness, right? So we need to change that mindset. So maybe this is a new way of bringing back mental health in the future of what we're doing in civil infrastructure.
Yeah, no, it's great. And so, just at this point in time, and I know you're still getting into this, but like, what do you see in terms of like your vision, or what do you see of ways that this technology can help in the AEC sector with, mental health? Like, what would it look like? What would some of the solutions look like?
Yeah, first we need to create education and awareness of the problem. We don't talk about it enough. I know you're big on leadership and development in the engineering space of getting engineers moving up in their skill sets, but we need to educate better. I mean, you're on that, right? That's what you're focused on, is getting education for these
Sure.
engineers so they can become great leaders, which would tie into like, we also need to focus on their mental health, because it's important for us because of all the environments we're in, our personal experience in life, these things that affect our mental health. We need to make sure that they can become those leaders and understand their egos and blind spots that sometimes get in those ways and in the ways of becoming a great leader. So there is a way that we'll be eventually be able to tie things in, maybe together of some sort, and just start working with
Sure.
construction companies and things like that to start just providing that resource of like, hey, man, I get it. Things are tough. There's a lot of struggles out there, especially if you're doing construction. It's a stressful job.
So it could look like making virtual sessions, let's say, available to their employees or something along those lines, like
Yeah.
for companies. Okay. So we work with a lot of architecture, engineering, construction firms, like you said, doing more training and learning and development, people leadership, project management programs. For those organizations right now, maybe they're watching this, maybe they're hearing about some of the mental health struggles of their professionals potentially. What can they do today to like help with that?
Yeah. First of all, you got to be aware of it. You got to see the signs. And most of us see the signs, I think, of like, we know if someone's struggling typically on a day to day basis. If we're working next to them, especially on the field, you can pretty much get a good sense of like whether they're having a good day or bad day, and maybe they're having personal problems and things like that. I think we need to kind of, if you hear something, say something. I think that's going to be really important, because the leadership within these construction firms, for example, or engineering firms, they're not out there in the field. They're not always engaging with their employees because they got to run the business, right? So there's got to be some kind of chain of communication, some kind of effect,
Right.
communication just
Like a
in
red
general.
flag that goes up
Yeah,
if something
something's got to
happens.
happen, right? You just
Yeah.
like, hey, Jim's not having a great day. Wife left him, whatever. He's got some issues going on. Like, just kind of bring awareness to it, because then there are ways that you can gradually, I'm just going to use Jim for an example, is reach out to Jim. Be like, hey, man, just
Right.
start a communication with him, just observe things, sit down, have a conversation. There's different ways that you can engage, but they have to be willing to engage. That's the other thing, is not everybody's going to be like, hey, yeah, I got mental health problems. Let's have a conversation about that, right? They have to want it, right? They have to want to, make a life
Right.
transition and make a change in their mindset, right? So it's not easy for some.
Yeah, no, it's not easy. And one thing I was just thinking about as you said that is, and I've seen, I think schools maybe do this with children before, where you have like, how you feeling today? Like green is good, yellow is okay, red is like I'm not feeling great. Like something like that, where obviously someone would have to be comfortable enough to show that. But my point being is that if someone knew, hey, someone's like red today, I need to have a conversation with them, right? I mean, we have all these things on our dashboards, like these companies that use Teams, you can put this little light on, like I'm busy, like do not disturb, right? Like, what if there was a little light that says, "Hey, I'm not feeling that great today," type of thing, But I do think
Yeah,
that you can't help someone unless they kind of need the help, or you're checking in with them on a regular basis,
yeah. And most
and that's
people,
critical.
might seem like they don't want it, but they do. They really do need it. And you just have to be able to understand it, identify it, and, offer help. Listening is huge. I mean, it really comes down to just listening, and not, in the construction world, we tend to, at least my experiences back in the day when I was doing these type of construction things in public works and listening to contractors, it was a lot of
Yeah,
harassing. There's a lot of like, oh, you're the probie or you're the rookie, get out there and do a lot of
right,
like mental like stuff. You think about it now, you're like, oof, that was kind of rough. You had to be really thick skinned to deal with some of that stuff back in the day, like, to overcome that. I don't think it's like that. I would hope not anymore, but maybe it is. So if that's the case, maybe it's a cultural thing. Then we need to look at each company and look at what they're doing as far as their leadership and how they're impacting their employees. And, maybe that's where you guys come in and we start to fix the leadership of these companies first. And then they can obviously that trickles down to like the employees and stuff like that. So that's another kind of way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good approach, like educating the leadership of these organizations on mental health, the warning signs, how you can handle it. It's just like a step one, because if they don't recognize it, right, they're not going to be, nothing's going to really happy with it within that organization.
Yeah.
So, but the other thing I want to ask you about is I know in the engineering industry, technology, digital transformation, that can tend to take time. Like I know, for example, prior to COVID, most civil engineering companies, because I worked as a civil engineer, they would never do remote work because they would say, hey, there's no way we can work remotely, right? We got to have plans in front of us. We got to be looking at things together. We got to be talking together. And then in March 2020, overnight, like 99% of civil engineering firms went remote, right? So I guess my question for you is in terms of, pushing forward digital transformation in the engineering construction sectors, like what are some of the challenges? Like how can we actually get this done?
Yeah. It kind of ties into mental health too, because you have to be open to get uncomfortable with these changes of technology that are occurring, right? Generative AI is in our wheelhouse already. There's companies that are already using digital twins to create, power substations in like hours. I mean, you can really use technology now to do a lot of the tasks that engineers are always doing with designing and planning and stuff like that. There's going to be a lot of automation eventually in our space that's going to save a lot of time and money for utilities, but also the firms. And then, we have to also figure out what we're going to do from that as an engineer. Like, well, what else can we learn or what else can we do? And maybe that's like becoming a leader or getting other types of education so that you can move into be more flexible and be reskilled so that you can provide other services. Because I do think digital transformation is really going to impact some of our tasks. They're just in some aspects kind of mundane. So we want to embrace it though, because we don't want to you shouldn't be out there with blueprints. I know that's probably some people are going to be mad, but you shouldn't have paper copies sitting out there spread out. We have 3D images now. We have all this, virtual reality that's coming, augmented reality that's coming down it's happening right now. Literally, you can see it from LinkedIn. You can scroll through that and see all the stuff that's coming tech-wise, drones and things like that. That was one of the things where when we had our company, we were inspecting manholes with a camera. This is 2017. The engineering firms that we were trying to work with, they still wanted to do everything manually because obviously there's a dollar figure there, right? And if you're using robots to drop down there and take an image in 3 to 5 minutes,
which is probably way cheaper.
Exactly.
Now,
yeah. It was like $99 versus like $300. So you got to embrace it. I think engineering firms will have to adopt new business models because they'll be able to embrace, I hope they do, embrace the technology that's available to streamline your operations so that you can provide more value to your utilities companies that you're working with or your government agencies. And then you'll be able to streamline a lot of that. You'll get more work too. That's the other thing. You'll be able to get more work. You'll be able to grow your company. You'll be able to expand your geographical footprint, so to speak. So you just got to be able to embrace it. But that's going to be a mental health thing there too, because people are afraid of AI taking jobs, automation taking jobs. We got to be able to overcome some of that. So that's going to be interesting to see how this all works out in the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, and I think you said it. I mean, you kind of have to adapt and evolve, or your company is going to die out. You're going to get left behind, and all your competitors are going to blow you away. And I think one of the things that this is going to be really important for is when we talk with firms and organizations in the AEC industry, what they're always talking about is we don't have enough engineers to do the work. And it's a simple equation. I mean, if there isn't enough engineers in the United States and there's more work, you're not going to find more engineers. So the technology is what can maybe give you an advantage or allow you to do work faster with less people. So I think embracing it is not only going to kind of keep you relevant, but it's going to help you to overcome one of the bigger challenges today, which is just too much work for the number of engineers that we have, in our country here, at least in the US, and I'm sure some other countries struggle with this, but that's something that I think that's why if you're listening to this as a leader, you could probably solve multiple problems by really embracing AI and technology and starting to implement it into your organization. I mean, certainly things that are really important that Chad's talking about in terms of mental health is going to be very important, but also just from a numbers game of if you can't get your work done and you're not going to find more engineers, you're going to have to figure out a way to do the work faster. And so there's a lot obviously here, but I just think that it just all roads kind of point to this for organizations that want to kind of grow and thrive in the future.
Yeah, I want to add to that. I think learning how to optimize your people and processes is going to be the future, and using technology to do that, because you still need your people. Even though automation is going to play a role, you're still going to have people to work with people. People buy from people, first of all. So in that sales process, you still have to have people engaging with people. That's never going to go away. We are social creatures. We always like to interact with humans. That's just the way it goes, right? So that's always going to be in play. But that automating of tedious tasks is going to go away. The designing, planning stuff is probably going to expedite. So you're just going to have to, like you said, just adapt and just bring it, embrace it, and want to learn from it. Because if you don't, you're going to be left behind pretty much.
Right, for sure. Yeah. So Chad, what's one final piece of advice that you can kind of share with those in the AEC space, particularly those that are really looking to make a meaningful impact on mental health or advancing infrastructure through technology like we've been talking about?
When it comes to mental health, I would say if you're looking, because there's going to be a lot of retirements, I would assume, in the engineering firms that are in place now, that have been around for decades now. So if you're in the 40s, 30s, 40s, and you're looking to get in that leadership role, start embracing education, online courses, things like that, and start changing your mindset of how you're looking at the world right now, and just embrace that technology we're talking about, and just learn what it is, how it works. I'm taking courses right now through MIT just to learn no code AI machine learning, because I don't have to learn it because I pay people to do that, right? But if I can't speak at their level, how am I going to be able to sell it to someone like you have and be like, hey, man, we got the generative AI system. I don't know how it works, but my engineer does, right? So you still have to know what you're talking about.
You got to talk the language, right?
Exactly.
It's the same thing in engineering, right? Like when you want to become a manager, what makes you have the potential for being a good manager or leader is you understand what the people are doing when they're working on the project, because you did it for like 10 years, right? So you can really like speak their language. And it's often really hard for someone to come in from outside of engineering and become a manager in that organization, because it's hard for you to connect with the designers like on what they're doing. So I think, learning about that can be really valuable. So Chad, I want to thank you for spending some time with us here on the podcast. Where can our listeners connect with you and just stay in touch and keep an eye on what you're doing?
LinkedIn's probably the best way to connect to me. Just check out Chad Smeltzer. I pop up. There's not too many of us out there, so should be easy to find. That's the best place, man. Appreciate your time.
All right, awesome. We'll link up to Chad's LinkedIn URL in our show notes and below the video here. And Chad, I wish you the best in everything you're doing. It sounds like it's really important work, and I'm happy to help you in any way we can. And thanks for sharing the story with us.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate the time. Have a great day.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Chad. He is focusing on some very big topics here. Mental health is important in the AEC space, and I love that he's trying to help organizations better address it and help their employees. If you enjoy this episode, please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.